Ron Corso. Thank you Ron for having come into Radio Italia 1 da lei. Adesso però continuiamo in inglese o italiano?
English.
English.
My Italian is only rudimentary, Antonio.
Okay, we should have brought your granddaughter in.
I should have, yes, you can interpret for me, but it's a pleasure to be here. Lovely to be
so,
here.
let me put it. Ron's granddaughter is Eve Corso, that we've had on this program in the past. She was recognised with the Governor's Award for in multicultural matters. She's very interested in Italian language and will be maybe a teacher of languages.
Yes, she wants to be a teacher, yes.
And where is she now on that trajectory?
Well, she's been accepted into Cambridge University, which is a bit of a thrill.
Okay.
Got to work out the cost factors in spite of that, but she's very excited, and she will be starting in September. So she's working at the moment, saving up money, applying for scholarships. She'll go in and do education, languages and music.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yes, yes.
And I said you are at UniSA.
Yes.
UniSA Creative in particular.
Yes, the UniSA Creative is our department. So it's rather an interesting sort of term that all the creative aspects of the university are together in this field. And so we teach design students across a range of disciplines: graphic design, industrial design, etc. And aspects of education come into it as well. It's all probably going to change to some degree next year with the amalgamation, but that's another story. We can have another conversation on that at another time, Antonio. Yes.
Yes, very big topic. Okay, won't go into that now. So design and creativity and innovation. I know you have a big interest in that,
yes,
and
yes.
in
I do.
the education of it, in some of your publications, even with together with Anna Brown.
Yes, Anna Brown. I do work with Anna Brown. She's in furniture and industrial design. She's very much involved with the Design Institute, so she certainly is very vocal in that field. She'd be a very good person to maybe talk to as well.
Right.
Great advocate for design and the importance of design, which is the theme of the work that you're doing at the moment at the radio.
Yeah.
And I've looked at this, and if we talk about the importance of design, we've got to, I think, Antonio, put it in the context that we live in a very complex world. I think that these are sort of observations that are well known to us. And in this complex world, I think it's well defined by the notion of scale and change. We have exponential change. I mean, change as we've never experienced it as human beings ever before in our history. And it is a challenge. It is a huge challenge for us. A lot of things challenges we face in society today are to do with scale and change. Now, so in a world designed by humans, I suppose we can say that our world around us, our built environment, etc., our products, etc., designed by humans, scale and change have a big impact, huge impact.
Scale, by scale you mean size?
Well, it's scale as in, yes, I suppose size in a very generic sense. Whereas, I'll give you an example. What I'm going to suggest here is that when we talk about the importance of design, I'm going to focus on the interrogation of design, the importance of interrogating design, right? Which is not always possible when things are designed and conceptualized that in a time-place context. It's not always possible to predict the impact of the ideas you come up with.
Yes,
you see,
yes.
So I always think that interrogation is critical. It's one of the things that I try and build into the skill set of my students, but it's difficult because you can't. It's not laid out. It's a difficult thing to interpret because things change. But I'll give you an example. So we say, well, design continues on, but how well it works in a complex world becomes the issue. Now, let's imagine this. Imagine you and I, we're going back to Italy 200 years ago.
Yep.
And you and I are designing furniture. We're little craftsmen working in our village. There are other craftsmen making clothes and shoes, etc. You and I are designing furniture. And someone comes up to us and says, Antonio and Ron, I want you to design a chair for me. So we go through a design process. We design the chair based on the ergonomics, the function, the materials that we've got available to us, you know, the timbers that are available, the technology of the tools that we've got to be able to craft this object. And we put together a chair 200 years ago, and it's handmade. It's a one-off.
Yes.
And we give it to the client. 2 weeks later, this client comes back to us. He says, Antonio and Ron, I've got some problems with this chair. The joint on the left-hand side seems to be a little bit weak. Certain seating positions here are not as comfortable as I would like. So we're able to say, well, okay, yes, we can remedy that. You know, the scale of what we've created is such that we can easily remedy that situation. We can fix it. Now, let's fast forward 200 years. You and I are now running a furniture manufacturing business. And we have just designed, say, the chair that you and I are sitting in now.
Yes.
And the system is now different. We still go through the design process, the ergonomics, the materials, the manufacturing processes, the costings, etc., the marketing and all that sort of stuff that comes into it now, because we're now not producing a one-off chair. We're producing probably tens of thousands of these. They're all identical. They're all made in a mass production method. Now, imagine this. A customer comes back and says, Antonio and Ron, we've got a problem with the joint in one of these chairs, or the comfort factor or something. What's the difference? Scale. We've magnified that problem tens of thousands of times. So this is where the importance of design now becomes critical, because we're making things on a scale never seen before. If we don't get it right, we've got huge problems. 200 years ago, it didn't matter. We could rectify that design. We could fix it, modify it. And maybe that's what happens in the design process. You have iterations where you gradually improve the product. We don't necessarily have that luxury now. Once we go to manufacturing on a large scale, if we don't get it right, we're going to have huge consequences in terms of the problems that it might create. Now, these problems will manifest themselves not only in the design of the product per se, but also its effect on the environment and all sorts of other things. So that's what I mean by the complexity of scale, the importance of scale, the importance of getting it right. Now, if I can go back a step, and you know, we started off by talking about design, the importance of design. I want to now focus on the particular human characteristics that allow us to undertake this design process. And I might suggest that humans are unique creatures. We are rather unique as creatures on this planet. And the reason is that since the beginning of time, not only have we learned to adapt to our environment, which all creatures have to do in order to survive. It's part of evolution. You adapt to the environment. If you don't adapt, you don't survive. However, we have the special ability to now adapt the environment to suit our needs. Now, big difference. No other creature on the planet can do this. Okay? No other creature on the planet can do this. Adapting the environment to suit our needs. Now, this is where the notion of designing comes in, because we are now modelling future scenarios. We are coming up with ideas, we are putting them into practice, we are actively changing our environment to suit us. And as I said, we are the only creatures that can do this. Now, everything that's ever been created by humans, think about this, started as an idea in someone's head.
Yep.
So when we talk about design, everything we see around us and everything that has ever existed in the history of the human race started off as an idea in a person's head. And we can call this maybe futures thinking, the notion of being able to cognitively model change, future scenarios.
So you're saying when you're, excuse me, when you're starting to design something,
yes,
you should think about how it might be used differently in the future?
Well, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
But the point I want to make is that all design starts with an idea in someone's head.
Yeah.
Then, there's an old saying, when you've got a great idea, you're in a minority of one.
Okay.
The next thing we are able to do very well is communicate our idea. So I come up with a great idea, so I tell you,
yeah,
Antonio, look at this, how about this? and then we have an exchange, and then we maybe tell other people. Well, that may lead to a fairly sophisticated process of bringing that design into production, for example, right? Then we go through that making process. We've got an idea, we communicate it to someone, then we make it. Then we're good at organising all the systems that bring it into being. You know? So in the 21st century, our furniture design factory, we've got a great system to be able to make these things and bring them into being. All right, so this notion of having ideas in our head, being able to sort of speculate about futures thinking, how do we do this? The thing is, we have imagination. Human beings have imagination. Now I want to emphasise that in talking about the importance of design, in talking about the design process, imagination is critical. Okay, and it is important in the notion of creativity, which brings ideas into being, and it is important in the design process because imagination has given us the world we live in. Okay, an idea in someone's head. Now, there's an irony here. And the irony, Antonio, is that we can look at our world. Imagine that our great-grandparents could come back to life.
Yeah.
And they could walk in here and see the world we live in today, you know, from their village in Italy. They would be absolutely gobsmacked. They would not be able to comprehend the sophistication of the world we live in, the technology, the communication systems, the marvels of the things that we surround ourselves with, correct?
Well, I'll tell you, something I've heard my father say
Yes.
several times was when he was here in Australia, it
Yeah.
would have been the 1960s,
Mm.
he used to think, I've seen so much change
Yes.
in my lifetime,
Yes.
will I ever see so much again?
Yes. Yes.
And so,
Yes.
yeah,
And the answer to that is...
I mean, having gone through
and the answer to that is he would see it multiplied.
Enormous
Right.
times.
And so given that we live, because we're part of it, we don't notice it. But if you step back from and look and say, wow, look at the wonderful, the communication systems, the way we can do things, the technology, the wonderful objects that we surround ourselves with. Yet, in spite of living in a world of the greatest technological advancement in human history, we ironically face some of the humanity's grandest challenges. Now, things like climate change, depletion of resources, pollution, overpopulation. Some skeptics would say that these potentially could destroy us. Now, there is a great irony. How on earth, in the midst of this great technological advancement, can we have situations where we're potentially close to extinction? Right, so again, we can conclude that we can have great ideas, we can execute these great ideas, we can put them into practice, but if we don't interrogate them well, okay, we're going to be great at putting into practice poor ideas.
yeah.
So this is where the interrogation bit comes in. This is why I say that interrogation is key. Because we're all going to keep coming up with ideas. People will come up with ideas and new possibilities and new systems and new products. But if we don't interrogate them well, then we're going to potentially create lots of problems, just like our chair example. So let me just touch on creativity and how I think this is important in this process. Unfortunately, it's creativity, a lot of people acknowledge that it is important. It's not always well understood. It's often ill-defined. It's seen as a talent activity. You've either got it or you haven't. Right? It can't be taught. However, research definitely shows that we are all born with a natural creativity because we've got imagination. Right? So it's there. And in fact, statistics show that kids under the age of 5, 95% of kids under the age of 5 exhibit extraordinary creative abilities.
And I think I've read, and I hear every now and then, that schooling destroys creativity.
Let me get to that. After the age of 5, and this is well documented research, after the age of 5, that creativity drops to 5% of the population.
Wow.
And that's incredible. So something happens at about the age of 5. We go to school, we learn to socialise, we have to follow rules, etc., etc. And And that natural creativity, people like Ken Robinson would argue, is educated out of us. Rather, amazing sort of statistic. There's a wonderful YouTube clip called "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" I'd urge people, if you're interested, to watch it by Sir Ken Robinson. It's the most viewed YouTube clip in history, so it's significant. And he says that not only do schools not encourage creativity, they discourage it. Now that's a fairly significant statement. When we talk about imagination, when we talk about creativity, and when we talk about the importance of that to design, if it's failing there, then we potentially have problems. If we want to make an argument for the importance of design and it's not being recognised at that sort of elementary school level, then we have some issues. So we don't tend to be good at teaching, and I often say to workshops that I run for people, say, well, when you were at school, what would you say typified your educational experience? Most would say, and hopefully it's a little bit different now, but certainly when I was at school, it was based on knowledge acquisition and knowledge retention. Everybody learnt the same stuff, right? Ironically, we're all different, yet we all learnt the same stuff. We all sat for the same exam. We all did the work individually. For example, we didn't do very much collaborative work, and yet in the real world, it's a collaborative environment, and increasingly so. So, I mean, I would argue that, we haven't been good at teaching, and hopefully that is changing. The thing that probably works against it is that human beings, we all like security. We all like to feel secure. We all like to know where we're going, what we're doing, etc. We don't always welcome change. That's a fact.
Very few people.
Yes. And we have what might be termed a conformity bias. If I see you doing something that seems to work, I'll say, well, that's good. I'll do the same, right?
Yeah.
So that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with security. There's nothing wrong with being a bit sort of cautious about change, and there's nothing wrong with having a conformity bias. In fact, having a conformity bias is part of evolution, part of survival. You don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. But however, when we talk about creativity and exercising our imagination, there are some contradictions here, because ideas can only come when we shift our perception. This is my definition of creativity: the ability to shift your perception from what you know to something new, to something maybe a little bit unknown, to be able to see things in new ways. And this involves an awareness. I have a thing that I do with my students called looking and seeing. You say, well, it's a big deal, but you can look, but what do you actually see? And creative people are able to gain insights into things that the rest of us can't. A definition of an entrepreneur is someone who can see an opportunity that no one else can see, or that few others can see.
Yes.
And so this is really, really important. So seeing things in new ways, challenging conventions is important in the creative process. Welcoming disruptions. Now, again, we can say that new ideas come from disruptions. Something has to sort of alter the status quo in order for us to sort of say, well, I need to change this. I need to come up with something new. We challenge conventions, we challenge assumptions, we embrace ambiguity, and we embrace failure. There's an interesting one, you see. Creativity involves embracing failure and learning from failure.
How can you teach that to your students?
Well, this is interesting, because you've got to model that. You've got to give them experiences where they use exploratory thinking, speculative thinking. We give them a challenge and say, okay, now I don't have the answer. I'm giving you a challenge. You've got to try and work this out. We go through a design process of trying things, and it's trial and error. Now, it's interesting because failure, we learn very early in school to avoid failure at all costs. I say to my students, who's ever been encouraged or rewarded for giving the wrong answer? And you soon learn that if you are discouraged in giving the wrong answer, then you don't volunteer. So the teacher asks you a question about something, you don't say, I think it could be this. No, you only put your hand up if you know the answer. So it's right, wrong answer type of approach, rather than saying, we've got a situation here, let's toss around a few ideas. And probably 9 out of those 10 ideas won't work, but to get to the idea that works, you have to go through the 9 possibilities that don't. Now, we don't model that way of thinking and that way of working. You see, we tend to base our education on knowledge acquisition and knowledge retention, and this is the big problem.
We're going to have to go on to our next guest.
Yes, okay, but okay. I'll finish off by saying that the big challenge that, say, as educators, in terms of providing education for young kids, they're going into a future where current jobs are either going to change or become obsolete, or there's going to be new jobs that we haven't even thought of yet. And that's why we need creativity, that's why we need to exercise our imagination, and that's where design is important.
So we need flexible minds,
absolutely,
active minds,
yes, absolutely,
dynamic approaches.
Yes, that have got flexible ways of thinking, and in ways that may be unconventional. And the notion of failure is really important. That you learn from it, that you try things out. You're not afraid to try and speculate about things.
Yes.
And that's probably it in a nutshell.
Cool, thank you. Thank you
My
very
pleasure.
much.